going on. Oh, can you make me the host? I can't share.
It says we are going live. Okay.
There is no option now to make you the host.
Okay, shall we just start then without the video?
Yeah,
because
start without the video. Yeah, start off. Yeah, Karen.
Yeah, so good evening and welcome to Wisdom Wednesdays. I want to tell you all who've been patiently standing by, our apologies. You know, first time we run into a bit of a technical hitch, so to speak. Anyways, thank you for joining us today. Another very important subject. As you are aware, I mean, we call ourselves the Wisdom Women. And we are to an extent because we try to share with you our experiences and our life stories and what we perceive of the world out there. But for us too, it's a changing paradigm, you know, on a daily basis, right? We too try to make ourselves into better people, better, you know, do better works, you know, whatever it is that we too try to do with ourselves. And part of that is today's subject, listening. I have to be honest, guys, I have a big problem. Well, I listen, but am I hearing? That is the key to today's subject, right? So when I listen, immediately I go into this drive. I want to solve somebody's problem, right? I want to say, okay, now if you do this and if you do that, and let's do this and let's do that. And sometimes people just come to you to talk to you. They just want a ear. They don't want you to solve their problems. And I go into this drive, and I have been going into this drive when someone talks to me. And I think sometimes people come to me too because they think I'm a problem solver. So it's that empathy that I have in a way, but this managerial person that I am, I try to go in there and solve this problem for people. So yeah, so for me too, guys, today's subject is very important because I too am trying to change how I perceive the world and how I deal with the world. The other problem is on a daily basis in this country, in this past few years, and especially within this year of COVID, you know, I wear this other hat, which is I'm an environmentalist and an activist in conservation, in conservation. And daily we've been crying out because there's so many forests being cut down and so much sand being dug out and so many issues, whether they are legally approved or illegal or whatever it is. It's to me, who's a conservationist and an environmentalist, I think, Fazana, you can second me on this. It's devastating. And this whole year, although we have been on a semi-lockdown situation for most of it, I have been reaching out to ministers. I've been going and having meetings because we believe that dialogue is key, right? We believe that, you know, by talking to somebody and hearing their point of view, we can maybe try to afford some change because we want to leave a nation better than we found it for future generations. And so it's heartbreaking because if they cut a tree down, if they cut a forest down, we find then animals get displaced. When animals get displaced, then we have human-animal conflict. Not only that, COVID has shown this coronavirus has existed in animals for years, centuries really. And it has this opportunity of jumping from animal to human that much easier. So while we are talking to the politicians and to officers in the departments and anybody who is willing to listen to us, are they hearing what we are saying? Are we hearing what their reasoning is behind this carnage is the only way I can describe it, right? So are we hearing them? What is the thought process behind this? Are we actually thinking that we need this oxygen and air and trees and marshes to protect this nation from the storms and ravages of nature and so many different things? So yeah, so this is a very important subject, listening. Are we hearing though? Selvi, over to you.
Thank you, Carol. I think you touched a very important point here. I was looking at a video by David Attenborough, who's talking about the status of our planet and the way it is being eaten up by what we call as progress. And he says we are coming to a position where there will be a place of no return. And he says that the only way in which we can tackle this is through the human wisdom. And that wisdom is the one that we have to now adhere to, cling on to, in order to change and get back to our nature, to get back to normal, get back to what we know as a civilized society. And so I'm really pleased that Soraya and Carol thought of this idea of bringing the wisdom of women into play. And this particular series has been very productive in that sense. Let me look at what Carol was saying also, that when we are talking to the people in the government, are they hearing us or are they listening to us? See, there is a lot of difference between listening and hearing. See, but listening actually is the most important component of our communication. If they don't listen, we don't feel that we have been heard, right? And we normally communicate in 4 different ways. That is reading, writing, speaking, and listening. We are normally taught how to read, how to write, how to speak, but we are never taught how to listen. Nobody really tells us how to listen. But listening has to come with understanding and empathy. But when listening, what do we normally do? When we are trying to communicate something, we say, I want to get across my point first. When I'm trying to get my point first, I'm not listening to what the other person is saying. Then sometimes when you're trying to formulate the response to the other person, you are pretending to listen and saying, but you are really not listening. And you selectively hear a few things here and there, but you're not attentive to what that person is trying to communicate. See, this happens because you're busy thinking what you might say in reply, not to understand. You're not actually there to sit silently and listen. You're trying in order to understand the other person, but you're now thinking what I might say to the other person and how should I say it. So when that thought process is going on in your mind, you're not listening, you're only hearing the person. Another thing we do when we are listening to people is we filter what they are saying through our life experiences. Oh, he's saying this. Oh, that means it happened to me as well. And then immediately your thought goes into what happened to you. And then your frame of reference of that then combines with this. And then you start saying, oh, he says now he's going to go and buy a house or a car. But I don't have a car. I don't have a house. So I'm really badly off. Maybe he's better off. And all these thoughts then come into your mind and it clogs it up and you cannot actually hear what this person is trying to say. So this is the problem in that communication. And it's a complete formula for misunderstanding. But, actually listening is actually an art. Eric Fromm, the therapist, he's been a therapist for 50 years. He argues listening is an art like understanding poetry. So when listening to another person, Eckhart Tolle says, when listening to another person, don't just listen with your mind. Keep your mind aside. Listen with your whole body. Feel the energy field of your inner body as you listen. That takes attention away from your thinking and creates a still space that enables you to truly listen without your mind interfering. See, that is actually the greatest gift one can give to a person, to listen with your mind not interfering. And that creates the empathy, and the condition of such empathy you develop, it develops understanding. And understanding is a crucial facet in the capacity of love. To understand another means to love, but in a sense, it's like reaching out. Understanding and loving are so inseparable, and that can happen with a proper, attentive, and empathetic listening. If they are separate, then it is actually mind has come into it, and that's where we go wrong. So my point here is that we need to really look at understanding love and how it can come through empathetic listening. And that empathetic listening is called listening on the 5th level. Highest form of listening is supposed to be empathetic listening. This level of listening involves getting inside another person's map of the world with the positive intent of truly understanding them. In other words, trying to see the world the way the other person sees it and to understand how they feel. I think this is very crucial, and this is what we need from each one of us, from our bureaucracy, from our politicians, from everybody in this nation. We need people to listen to us, not just hear us or ignore us. Thank you, Carol.
Unmute.
Yeah, Kamini, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say how what Selvi said resonated so well with me. I mean, all hands on deck, all cards on deck. Like Carol said, I'm also guilty of this. I'm very bad at being fully present. And as I said in the comments also, especially if someone isn't saying something that resonates with me. And I've been trying hard to create a better discipline to listen to things that I don't like. Also, I just wanted to share an interesting statistic I found when researching for today's topic. So it cites studies from the International Listening Association, and it says that we spend about 45% of our time listening, but we are distracted, preoccupied, or forgetful about 75% of that time. The average attention span for adults is about 22 seconds. Immediately after listening to someone talk, we usually recall only about half of what we've heard. Within a few hours, only about 20%. So I think that would be applicable to many of us. But I loved what Selvi said about listening with the entire self. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Selvi.
I was saying the listening has to be with your whole body, being aware of what's happening to you in your body. And when you are aware of what's happening to you in your body, your mind goes out. The mind is the most destructive thing that spoils relationships and listening. And so we really need to know how to actually negate it.
Yeah, so, I think Shami actually says, Shami says to everyone, I think attending a class, training session made me realize how bad a listener I can be. Yes, we are all guilty of that, Shami. I mean, as I said to you, I don't know, my brothers went away when we were quite young. They went overseas for studies. And so I was, because of my sports, I think I was like the guy around the house amongst all these girls. And so I don't know, maybe that's what made me into this person who always wants to solve other people's problems. I'm very good at that. I'm not so good at doing my own, but yeah. So anyway, to continue, yeah. So
I had just a quick comment to what Selvi said. I learned the sweetest lesson from my little son. You know, one day he came crying and I was trying to fix him and he says, "Mommy, just be there, just be there," you know. So that was a powerful lesson. That is about this listening, right, Selvi?
That's right.
Yes.
I mean, it's amazing how we can learn from the kids too. You know, sometimes they seem so much smarter than us. So on that, you know, today we have had this. Yeah, Kamini, go ahead.
Yeah, just a small thing also to add to the discussion is about how it also varies. It's a masculine trait to provide solutions. And, you know, the listening. And I mean, we've been talking about how we have the masculine and the feminine. And the listening part is part of the feminine of listening, nurturing, you know, bringing out those qualities. And that's been an underlying theme of all our shows. So this also moves more towards that aspect as well.
Now I know why as a kid I used to always say, why wasn't I born a boy? I want to be a boy. So anyway, so, you know, guys, today we have had a lot of sadness in the air and mothers weeping and crying. And is anybody hearing the tears of the mothers? And I say mothers because, you know, obviously we are a bunch of females who are trying to reach out to both males and females, but we know the pain of mothers, right? And so Soraya is going to talk about this, you know, the tears of the and cries of the mothers, and are the people listening? Soraya?
Thank you, Carol. Good evening to everybody who's listening. So at the foundation of our inability to listen is the hostilities and the inattention we build within us. So I want to begin with the Dhammapada. Hostilities don't end hostilities. Only ending hostilities can end hostilities. So whether we like it or not, that is a universal truth. So to say he hurt me, he doesn't listen to me, he's mean, it only stills hostilities. So I just want you to bear that in mind as we go forward with this discussion this evening. And I want to first distinguish, in my understanding, what's the difference between listening and hearing. And I have a very volatile task today to talk about our leaders, our politicians, our statesmen. Are they listening to us? Why is society so divided, and why are we politically so torn apart? Are our leaders listening? So I think hearing and listening are totally two different concepts. Hearing is a process, a function of perceiving sound. So it's just sound. And listening, on the other hand, it means to pay attention to sound, to pay attention to that sound and hear something with thoughtful attention and consideration. So are we getting that? Are citizens getting that? Is a question that we need to seriously answer. And just does not mean only the leaders, but are the citizens listening to the leaders? This is a two-way process. So when we look at the catastrophes that is happening in our country today, the Mahara prison incident, wailing of a mother for the death of her son, tears of mothers who are looking for sons who have disappeared and feeling an unheard cry, tears of the Muslim community today whose COVID diagnosed kith and kin are being cremated. Are the elected leaders, are our representatives listening in our country, in our nation? And then let's look at the world. Racism is thriving. Immigrants' rights need attention. Elevating poverty, listening to the cries of the poor. Are the elected representatives or leaders listening? So listening is a two-way street, as I said. Are they listening? And are we responding? Are we also listening? Is a question we citizens need to ask. So for instance, when our when the government of Sri Lanka called on certain precautionary measures to be taken for COVID, wear the mask and keep distance, lots of people adjusted the mask and wore it when they were in the presence of law enforcement. So that was not a good strength that the citizen carried. So this is a two-way process. How we express ourselves so the other person can listen actively is very critical. So how we express ourselves is very, very critical. So we have to look for leaders who are also engaged in the long-term good of our country, above and ahead of any short-term personal gains. What we need is statesmen, not politicians. So this is very important, that if our leaders are not listening, they are politicians. They're there for a short-term goal. So how can we change that is another question that we have to ask. Okay. The greatest part of listening is to make an empathic connection. When there was a horrible budget that needed to be passed in the United States, Barack Obama was asked, are you worried about the budget? He said, no, I'm not worried about the budget. I'm only worried about the empathetic deficiency in our country. People are not listening to one another. They're talking over each other. So the greatest part of listening is to make an empathic connection, is to listen to what is alive in the other person. So as Sylvie said, don't listen with your mind, listen with your whole being. Are we trying to connect mentally with the other or not empathetically is a question we have to ask. Unfortunately, there's a lot of healing that needs to happen in the world today. But all I know is that when we empathize with another person, a lot of healing happens to us, within us. We must be willing to do such, and it's not easy when you specifically know. Now come, Carol, you said you go for these meetings. When you specifically go for these meetings, we always say do a lot of self despair work. You're going to get this, you're going to get that thrown at you, so do a lot of self despair work before you go into the session, go into the communication. That will support us to enhance our listening. Then we mourn with the other person's needs, because when you hear the other side tell you this is what we need, this is what is not happening, we have to mourn that too. But instead of listening, we might go forward with another of our requests. So then we have listened with the mind, not with our hearts. So when people don't support our values, what do? We make moralistic judgments. Oh, he is that, he is that. So this is quite opposite to what we habitually do. Is to tell our story to try to fix the problem. So it is very important for us to know that when you are in an empathic state of listening, you can't be the advisor, you can't be the fixer-upper. You try to fix it. Then you can't be the storyteller. Hey, have you heard of this one? This one had a worse problem than you. And then you can't be the one who ups the story. Oh, I think I told you that. Yes. So I think in the minimum, one of the powerful ways in which we can listen is to paraphrase what we heard. And I think that is a commitment it's a simple commitment that goes a long way. Paraphrase what you hear. And we will discuss this further. I think my 3 minutes is up. Thank you, Carol.
So Raya, I think what you said is so important, the empathy. When you listen to people, I think what should come out is the sincerity, right? For me, that sincerity is the most important thing. If you know the person listening to you is sincerely listening, I think everything else falls into place. So if we're all pure in our heart and sincere in our purpose, I think everything else happens naturally.
Right. And to have that feeling of being felt, right? Sincerely. Oh, she heard me. He heard what I have to say. Yes. Thank you.
The other thing,
I think you made a very important point here, that that there are three things that comes out of good listening. I think we need to make note of it. So I'd like to repeat that. That first thing is you need to paraphrase it, so that they know that you have heard the whole story fully. And the second thing is not to give any solutions, be a fixer. And you're not going to be a storyteller where you're telling her about other people's stories or him about other people's stories. See, these are very, very, very important points. When there's good listening, this is the kind of outcome, of good listening. And thank you for bringing that point.
Selvi, you have been a phenomenal listener to me this evening. Thank you so much for paraphrasing and bringing to as a whole what I meant to communicate. Thank you.
I think one other thing that Selvi said previously, about giving your whole being when you are listening. I think some of us have lost the art of making this eye-to-eye connection when we talk to people. And that's also extremely important. It's as important as, sometimes you say if you deal with children who are, have learning disabilities or autistic or whatever, they say, reach out and touch them while you're talking to them, because they make that connection to you. In the same way, when you're talking or somebody's talking to you and you're listening and you're giving your ear, I think if you keep this eye-to-eye contact, then that person can see how genuine you are, and you are genuine, right? When you're giving that kind of undivided time and attention to someone else's story, and having that, then the empathy also rises to the top. So, comes.
Sorry, another question. I mean, so for me, one of the toughest places I do find it difficult to really listen properly is when a person speaks specifically about politics. Other things I can maneuver, but politics, and I'm learning, I'm pushing myself through a learning process. And Soraya spoke very specifically of that. And I think, today in every country, you see such division, like, any country, the left wing or the right wing. And, so Soraya gave us some points, but how do we, I mean, I feel and it's trickled down to all of us. And I feel in a way, sometimes we're pawns of, political plans and strategies to keep everyone separate, right? So how do we as individuals overcome this? Soraya did give some points, but I just want to hear a bit more.
Oh, so present with the intent. I mean, first is your presence. So, and sometimes we can get overwhelmed, especially I know what you meant by politics, Actually, what we can only solve is something that is within us and not around us, even in our homes. So to be that person who is committed to listening, to have that thought in you and to cultivate that habit is a very good start. To be very intentional in every time you enter into a dialogue. And I think our homes are good laboratories for those of us who have kids, particularly, how to fine tune that art of listening. Did that help, Kamini? Yes. And
so we have a comment from Riley. He says preconceived notions and judgments could affect listening. And
yes,
sometimes it has been found that it is easier to communicate with strangers, which is true, right? Sometimes people bear their soul to you when you're on a flight sitting next to them. And there's no hope of ever meeting again. But I suppose this is what Riley is talking about. And
yes.
So moving on from this, we'll come back to all of this later, guys. Fazana, you will talk about the importance of customer relations and in the corporate field, good listening, how they can turn to successful businesses, right? Fuzzy?
Yes, thank you, Carol. So I'm coming from a totally different perspective, not in areas where Soraya and Selvi spoke, more from a commercial point of view, from a business point of view, because even their listening plays a key role. So one of the key to a successful conversation is to listen, not to talk. So being a good listener can create trust and confidence. It is a helpful skill in both personal and business relationships. Listening doesn't have to be just between people. It can be between a brand and its customers or its employees. That's a different kind of conversation. Customers and employees, when they talk, when they share feedback and opinions, companies listen intently for opportunities to capitalize on what they learn. Brands that listen well respond by doing something with that information. Their response isn't in words, it's in the action of what they do after they hear what has been told about them. So if you look at the listening in a commercial perspective, there are many, many advantages. Listening gets you good feedback and data. Your customers can give you the best source of real-time feedback, and employees on the front line are typically the first to hear from customers. So they can diagnose all this information and analyze the data. So this can only be done if you listen. So leadership and management must listen to the front line. Listening gets your stories to share. There is an old saying which says the squeaky wheel gets the oil, right? So if you squeak more, you get more attention. So companies usually debrief problems and complaints, but it's important to look at all the feedback and then find positive solutions through there are many options such as websites, brochures, and so on. So some of the best marketing can come from your stories. Can you hear me? I'm not sure because something happened on my screen. Okay. Um, so listening also can help you grow customer retention because, universally it is accepted that, keeping existing customers is better than acquiring new ones. So make your existing customers happy. Listen to them. When you listen to customers, you learn about them, about their problems, about their pain points, and you're also strengthening a very important thing, your bond of trust. That's the most important part of any relationship. As I mentioned earlier, the sincerity. So the customer feels that you are sincerely interested in them. With this, what happens next? It increases the customer's spending because they love you more. So they spend more. They'll also talk about you more to their other friends and relatives. A recent research had found that customers who receive responses to their tweets are willing to spend about 20% more on average on their items. So see the loyalty, it's 1/5. The loyalty increases by 1/5. So regular customers spread the word of mouth about the good experience they got from your company, and they're more likely to talk about it even in social media. So modern day, you have to be very careful. You have to listen to these social mediums as well, not just a conversation. It's a conversation on digital platforms. You have to listen to Twitter, the Facebook, and all other digital platforms from a marketing perspective to see what has been said about your products. So there's a big difference between a salesman and a customer service rep who listen instead of just talk and sell. So when you ask questions about the product and focus on listening to the customer's answers, you get to the bottom of their needs. If not, you're just pushing your ideology only, and that won't take you far. So you need to really listen to the customer and then see what the customer wants, make adjustments in your product, customization, or even little deals that the customer wants, so that you can make the customer happy. So all this can be done only by listening. So another important aspect that happens when you listen is listening in a commercial sense creates brand ambassadors. Sometimes to create a brand ambassador, a company has to spend a huge fortune. But by simply listening to customers, you create natural brand ambassadors. And these brand ambassadors are more powerful because they talk again very sincerely to their friends, family members, and colleagues. And this is further amplified through the social media. And this is your best marketing because these customers will sing your praises to everyone they meet, and they'll be your best brand ambassadors. Let's look at employees, okay? Just like customer feedback is gold, so is employee feedback, because if you listen to your employees' suggestions and ideas for improving any aspect of the business, and you can act on these suggestions, you'll be amazed at the incredible sort of suggestions that your employees bring. They will be so happy, and they will, most of the best of class organizations have an immense capacity to listen to their employees, and they will start with a complete cultural shift and change change their mindset to listening, which will be the ultimate objective to make your employees happy and retain your employees. So you need to make listening part of the culture of your company. The happiest employees and customers are those who feel that the companies they work for and the business relate to them and are not just pushing their agenda. So when you do all this, one of the important things is you will avoid crisis because you're planning ahead. You don't need to sort of suddenly, act on a big huge issue because you have been listening to customers, listening to employees, you've been checking your social media. You won't have sudden crisis that you have to deal with. So in conclusion, I would say, the quieter you become, the more you can hear. Thank you, Karen.
Fuzzy, obviously, I was just thinking there are some of these companies that listen to their employees, this happiness quotient. If you have your employee happy, you have better productivity. And I think some of these companies who have a creche for the little babies, of people who work, employees, even a gym, and all of that, you have more productivity. I know my son who works in a company in the US, I went into his office one day and there's all kinds of food, snacks, fruit, a gym, and employees are riding around on their bike or skateboarding through their, obviously it's a tech company, and obviously they're happy to work. He doesn't, they work long hours. They're quite happy to be there because everything they require and need is there. And obviously, some employer listen to the needs of the employees, right? And even mothers with babies or parents with babies who are allowed to bring their children, and somebody looks after these children while the parents work. So yeah, you're right about this.
Idea boxes, suggestion boxes, most companies have, like, now it's also digitalized where people can enter their ideas. And again, sincerity comes into play because you can keep entering ideas, but if you feel it's going into a black box and nobody is doing anything about it, then it loses its sort of confidence.
Correct.
So there are companies who meet weekly. I've been on committees where we meet weekly, look at ideas and then sort them into which department has to implement them, give immediate feedback to the employee who brought the idea and say why we're implementing it or why we're not implementing it, or if you're implementing it later, why the delays. So then the employee feels, okay, my ideas are taken seriously because I get feedback. Everyone's listened to my idea and I get feedback. So yeah, Carol, I mean, these are really important.
Fazana, I have a quick question. Do you think the frontline employees are given this training in Sri Lanka? The frontline who come to meet with the customers? I know in boardrooms we talk about this, but is it implemented really?
I think it is. From my experience, most of the staff I work with, they are very, very much in tune and in sync with listening to the customer. But also, having said that, Soraya, it's a constant training that you need to do because, as you know, frontline employees are the ones that the company has the highest turnover with, right? Because they start most careers at that point. So you need to keep doing this training so that this whole sort of culture catches on. Yeah.
Like mystery shoppers, continuous training, everything that's possible. Thank you, Fazana.
Thanks, Fazana. So we move on to Kabani, talking about listening as a powerful communication, especially in counseling and GBV and the areas that she works in, and also listening on that fifth level that Selvi and Soraya both spoke about, so over to you.
Thank you.
Attentive listening.
Attentive listening. I think today we've been particularly attentive, learning from what's been said before. I mean, before I speak on my topic, I just wanted to just touch on some of the comments. There was a comment around judgment, how all those preconceived judgments come into play. And recently, I also experienced it. I was communicating with someone, and I just got annoyed. And I realized I was getting annoyed because I was thinking of everything that has happened in the past. And in my practice of meditation and Buddhism, it's all about getting rid of that sense of judgment. And I've been meditating on it to get to the core. So I don't I don't go to that prejudgment. And I think that is where I kind of counter a little bit of what Sylvie said about the mind. You should leave the mind out. I think the mind is to be there, but a trained mind. And that is where things like meditation become important, so that you can listen fully. You can stop all those conversations and that prejudgment that comes in. And also something alluding a little to what Fuzzy had to say is about, in companies and in organizations, are you willing to listen as employers, especially around very sensitive topics? For example, if I cite my own organization, where we had a very sensitive issue around sexual harassment. And what was very, very disturbing to me was how people did not want to come forward because they thought we wouldn't. So, I mean, the entire experience helped change everything about how we looked at everything, and also really helping people to speak out. But I think it's really important that I mean, especially in areas of sexual harassment, which are very sensitive, the employee needs to know that you are going to be listened to, and it's going to be confidential. It's not going to, even whistleblowers in organizations, they need to know that it's going to be heard. Some people's lives are at stake when they do that. So I just wanted to touch on that, and that helps me in coming into this topic that Carol, that I am to talk on. And I just want to put a disclaimer: I am not a counselor. I totally respect my team and everyone who does counseling, because I know it involves so much training. So I wanted to draw upon some of my experiences, my learnings, and also things that I have also read up on in preparation for today. And I think, why is it that talking about domestic violence, gender-based violence, and even child abuse, like listening to survivors of these, are important in this day and age, is because, as we've spoken in the past, so many people are victims or have experienced all these things. And sometimes it doesn't need to be like the counselor or therapist is not the first person you're going to turn to when you've had an experience. And for example, in my life many years ago, when I was in a relationship where the man was emotionally abusive, I was speaking to my friends, and I had a friend of mine. I met this person through internet dating, and at that time it was so, frowned upon. And one of my friends was like, come on, of course, what were you thinking? And there was so much judgment, and I know she cared, but it didn't help me. Whereas I had another friend who was very open. She's also really trained in this work, and she really helped me. She held me with love and care, and she really helped me get through the situation with love. And in fact, that was a very important stepping stone in my personal life towards energy healing, because the next thing I did was I wanted to learn more about myself, how it is that I was in this situation, even though I was a woman who worked on gender-based violence even at that time. Also, just talking about children, I think even at Shantimargam, something we found is that a lot of children experience loneliness. They feel they are not listened to or heard, and there's a sense of feeling alone, which can lead to them to turn to behaviors that may not be so healthy. And we've spoken of the cycle of intergenerational violence, that if a child is not healed, there's the possibility of them perpetrating violence as they become adults also becomes an issue. So in many ways, it's so important that when, for example, when a
So,
person...
sorry, Kamini, can I
Yes.
just butt in a bit?
Sure.
Can you hold your mic slightly away from you?
Sorry.
Because it's
Okay.
going a... Okay.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Carol. So, I mean, whether you're a counselor or a friend, I mean, I think when you talk to a person who is dealing with a situation, and we kind of had a post conversation about this after last time's show, so the research has shown that, and even us, when we do talk to people, when we reach out, if we know that we are heard in a not judgmental manner, if we've had these experiences and we feel supported and you feel validated, and you are more likely to continue speaking about it. And for a person who is living with violence in the home, it's a huge step to even speak about it, because you don't want people to think bad of your partner, and then you feel that people will judge you as being a bad person or a weak person for staying in that similar situation. And so it's and it takes a lot of work with the person who is a survivor to help them to get to the step of, I will take these definitive steps to seek support. And on the other side, if a person feels blamed and misunderstood or judged, you won't really reach out. And we know that in families where there is violence against women or intimate partner violence, if they have children in the family, there is also a high likelihood that the children will also be experiencing violence in some form. And in Sri Lanka, we have a very high victim blaming kind of culture. The CARE study that I referred to, done in 2013, really brought this out of victim blaming. And even if we, and talking about even the LGBTI community, which also already experiences so much stigma and discrimination, they have no one who will listen to them in a not judgmental way. I mean, I've heard even people, counselors we have interviewed for Shanti Margam, very disturbingly, when we give them the case study on a gay, potentially gay person, their response is to try to change that person's sexual orientation or gender identity. And that's terrible because I mean, there's nothing wrong with you. You just want to talk about your change, what you're experiencing. And I know as teenagers, when you're going through this change, it's very confusing. And I've known many of my friends in this from this community who have attempted suicide when they were teenagers. So I mean, if they don't find that space for non-judgmental listening, it, the consequences can be very tough, and it's terrible for our society. And also, just to point out something that came up in something I was reading, was to also understand that women who are living with violence, it's not that they haven't tried to get out of the situation. Um, you find that women try to, they're smart. There's no one who ever wants to be in a violent situation. So if, especially if you have children, women are going to be more cautious, and we know that women are economically dependent on their partners, or they have children and they're worried about what's going to happen to their children. So, you know, when you speak to a woman who is dealing with violence, living with violence, when you immediately say, leave the house, stand up, do this, do that, you know, the repercussions can be very hard on a person. And you should never come from a place that you're assuming that that person hasn't resisted this violence. And also in society, we do talk about, and I have also spoken about this, that, you know, there's the assumption that, you know, if a person has lived with abuse, they're more likely to stay in abusive relationships. And so in a way, there's a bit of also the victim blaming that can come in. But I think, I mean, when I talk about it, I mean that, you know, it's a process of kind of normalizing, and it takes a bit longer to get out of that situation of violence. So I just wanted to end what I was saying, because, for example, if we also talk about children, I was speaking to a child yesterday, a person below the age of 18. You know, what happens when you're not listened to? And what happens is that children can then turn to maybe positive forms of other people who may listen, but most often you will find that they turn to unhealthy places. And for example, if you turn to the internet, like so many times you see children just hooked on their phones, adults as well. But you do know that grooming for perpetrators of human trafficking and child abuse essentially happens through this process where children connect to people who they feel that will listen to them. So in this day and age, it is even more important to create a space of active listening of your child, instead of always wanting to put our judgments to them and our way of living, and just see children as they are, and you know, so that they have you to turn to. Thank you.
Thank you. It's such interesting conversations. I want to tell you a bit more about this victim blaming. I think when Fazana was at UNICEF, I was with Women for a Secure Sri Lanka with, I think, Selvi. We had a discussion at UNICEF about talking to even how these things are reported in newspapers, etc. But it still goes on, this victim blaming, even in how they report, you know. Sorry about it, but just moving on, because we are now getting pressed for time. Venerable Tenzin is not with us today, but she very kindly sent me this little blurb, which I'm going to read out to y'all. He said, when the Buddha talked about right speech, he was talking about both listening and speaking, both aspects of communication. Learned skill of listening and skillful means of intentional speech. This truly requires leaving our ego aside, not needing to have the center stage all the time or to say the last word. Listening is about the other, giving our attention fully and being present with an open heart is opposite of self-absorption. Speech and listening have ethical dimensions and deep spiritual dimensions. He also said, when we listen to the Dhamma, we hear things we haven't heard before. Clarifies what was heard before, one's mind becomes delighted. So I hope that is truly the result that's generated when Sri Lankan people listen to Dhamma talks, that we become better listeners and we truly connect with others. That way, we will also connect more deeply with ourselves and listen more to our inner voices. Then we take better care of ourselves and those around us. And she goes on to say, finally, just 1 minute, she had something else to add. Basically what she's saying is that even in the Dhamma, we talk about listening, and to deeply listen to another is a great act of compassion, she says. Listening to the cries of beings, great Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara responds with wisdom. And that is a whole practice in itself on the Buddhist path. Listening can lead to a whole another way of responding and engaging. May all beings listen and care deeply about each other. And she says, break a leg, as they say, go well. So that was from Venerable Tenzin. And we live in a majority Buddhist country, and sadly at this point, none of us are listening to each other. Guys, we are coming towards the end, so I'm going to allow Selvi a few minutes to give us a call to action, Selvi, before I tell you guys about next week, next show. Selvi?
Thank you, Carol. I'm really pleased to be able to say this call to action, because listening is a very important component for us, for our country, for our politicians, for our bureaucracy, for our business. And the most important thing that happens when you listen is that you're taken into the present. You're given the power of now. Eckhart Tolle, a very important philosopher of our times today, he says we can listen with empathy only when our mind ceases to think. When the mind ceases to think, we are in the present moment and enjoy the power of now, says Eckhart Tolle. And Lord Buddha actually emphasized this fact about being in the present several times in his talks. He says, in order to access the present moment, we simply need to separate ourselves from constant, incessant, and unproductive patterns of thinking that keep us locked in our minds and focusing on the past or the future. When we do this, the truth becomes clear. Everything we desire exists right now in the present moment. Lord Buddha says, live in the present moment. It's a way to access the types of positive emotions like happiness, joy, peace, love, and contentment. And listening helps you do this. So the call to action here is, in order to practice negating thoughts, which is what Buddha is saying, is to get away from ego, get away from the thoughts, incessant and unproductive thoughts. Lord Buddha has given us a very valuable meditation practice called the Vipassana. There are about 2 or 3 centers in Sri Lanka which can do it. And you need to register with them. It's free of charge. Please go and do a Vipassana meditation at least once in your lifetime. The 10 days that we spend in the center, it is just you and the present moment. There is nowhere to hide, nowhere to be, nothing to do. You are left to simply exist. I have done it 3 times and it has benefited me immensely. Initially, when you go in there may be fear, panic, and even sadness. But eventually, once those feelings pass and the thoughts stop, there is a sense of surrender. And from that place of inner surrender, there comes peace. That is when we are suspended in that moment, that present moment with no thought, no action. What is left is the very thing we chase: happiness, peace, joy, love, and contentment. Please register yourself for a Vipassana meditation in Sri Lanka. There are 3 centers which you can access through the net online. Thank you.
Thank you, Selvi. You know, we are a work in progress, as I said to you previously, all of us here. And a part of, I think, achieving that kind of change is if you acknowledge where you fail in your mind. And I think this is a very important discussion, especially for me, like Kamini said, you know, we too need to work on some of these things that we talk about today. Guys, next show is on the 23rd of December, and this is going to be an entertaining one. So it's not something deep and meaningful, but we would love all of you who join us live to do so that day. We will open the waiting room and let all of you in, so you can also, you know, join in this discussion, because today is our 20th show. And so the 23rd of December is the final one for this year. We would like to invite you all in to come and share your thoughts about what you learned or what you didn't learn or what you would like to learn in the future, because we mean to carry on next year. And hopefully, you know, if we have the funding collected, we want to do more work in taking this message out to the rural areas as well. So thank you very much on behalf of the panel. You guys are awesome. You're with us every 2 weeks. And hopefully in these 20 shows, you learned something. Please pass the word around and join us on the 23rd. We'd love to see all of you. Chami, Riley, you know, there's so many of you, Nelun, a lot of you who've been joining us regularly, Tilak and others who I haven't mentioned. So see you on the 23rd. Good night. God bless and stay healthy, guys. Bye.